Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Spring 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. So yesterday, we presented a session on proposal preparation and all the components required to submit a proposal to NSF. And I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the merit review process at NSF, or what happens to your proposal once it's in our hands. Enjoy and see you for the live Q&A in a bit.
Well, welcome to the merit review process session. I'm here with two of my colleagues to take you through the merit review process so that you can get an idea of what we do, why it takes longer than you think it might take, and how you can best position your proposals into the process. We go to the next slide. I'm Nigel Sharp. I'm a program director in the Division of Astronomical Sciences. I've been at NSF for almost 2 decades, and I've done almost everything there is to do at NSF, from facilities to grants. I'm here with Thiaga Nandagopal from the Division of Computing and Communication Foundations, or CCF, because I don't like to say that all the time, and Karen Santoro, who is one of our lawyers and has been here longer than I have, actually. So let's dive right into the merit review process. Thank you all for attending this session. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about the things that you might not think about when preparing a proposal, and the things that we need, that we emphasize that you should be doing. We know you understand your science, you understand your budgets, you understand what you're arguing about, but in order to handle proposals and to have a level playing field to handle them fairly, there are certain things that we require, certain rules that we expect you to follow, and certain constraints that you cannot go forward with. So we'll go through those and we'll discuss review. And then we'll have a pitch for how you can come and help us with this process by becoming a reviewer. So the bottom line, which we will be repeating regularly, is you should always ask us. Ask early, ask often. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't notify us of things at the last minute. Do not run down to the wire and then go, oh dear. Let us know in advance. Ask early. We can help. People forget. Program officers at the NSF, part of our job is actually to help you to ask us for money in the way that best enables us to say yes. Next slide. So this is the rough timeline of a process for proposal receipt, processing, handling, review, decision, recommendation, finally all the way through to an award, or regrettably to a decline to fund decision. We don't reject proposals. We decline to fund them in this round. And we encourage you in almost every case to try again, to learn from the process and to try again. The process goes through the announcement, through your submission, through our initial review of the formatting, of the technicalities. Much of that work is being handled by software now, by the submission systems. Fastlane, the older system that we've had for some years, research.gov, as things are moving to that newer system. Next slide. So some of these may seem a little obvious to most of you, but our experience is that even the most obvious things are occasionally skipped. So the first thing, read the opportunity you're applying to. That may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many questions we get that could be answered by reading the opportunity. On the other hand, we do appreciate that some of our language, some of our paperwork can be perhaps a little cluttered, perhaps a little long-winded at times. Much of it is written by committee. I won't say anything about that. So If you're not sure, ask for clarification. It is never a mistake to ask one of us to explain to you what the opportunity means, what it may be looking for, how we have seen it run if it's been running for a while. Ask early, ask often. The opportunity will include review criteria. The standard review criteria we'll be talking about. It may have specialized review criteria for that opportunity. Make sure your proposal addresses them all. As you write, it helps if you understand the merit review process, which of course is what this session is all about. Try not to make mistakes or typos. I regularly get proposals that say, according to add reference here, because they didn't go back and check and add the reference. So, and then check that it's complete. Things are getting better. I used to advise everyone that when they submitted a proposal to download the whole thing back from our systems to their local computer and compare it and make sure that what you think you submitted is what we appear to have received. We've had obvious mistakes. I had someone submit the 15-page project description into the one-page summary slot. And had they downloaded the whole thing, they would have noticed that obvious mistake. So it's a good idea to check. It's nice to go, it's submitted, I'm done. But it isn't necessarily correct. So check it. Next slide, please. So the first thing that happens is we go through and make sure. We have some systems that do this. We're increasingly, you may know, artificial intelligence initiatives are very popular. We are actually using software and doing a number of checks by software, but everything ends up with a human being, with a program officer, to decide if your proposal is complete, all the pieces are there that need to be there. If arrived by the deadline, if the program has a deadline, that it conforms to the requirements of preparation. These include font sizes and number of pages and things like that, which we'll get into. If the proposal does not meet it, there are some options to fix certain aspects of a proposal. Many pieces of a proposal cannot be fixed after a deadline. Programs without a deadline, you can always withdraw and resubmit. Nevertheless, there are proposals that are returned without review, that are not allowed into the competition, and that have to come back a year later. This is very irritating. It irritates us to have to go through it and then not be able to look at it, and it certainly irritates you to have all that work done writing a proposal and have it not even go to review. This is why we emphasize check the proposal when you submit it. We do get proposed. One of the other problems is, of course, the scope of different programs. So NSF has a lot of programs, and fitting your proposal into a given program may not always make it the most obvious fit to the program. So if we decide that your proposal is in fact outside the scope, we will do our best to find somewhere that it fits. We'd like to be able to take compliant proposals and handle them under, if at all possible. So you may actually find a proposal being transferred somewhere you weren't expecting. You also may find a proposal being reviewed under a label that you weren't expecting. Again, talk to the program officer why that happens. There are a number of reasons we're not going into here. Next slide. Read the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, PAPPG. There are a lot of detailed guidelines in there. It can be a little intimidating. It's a large document, but in fact, if you go through it, you will find large sections that you can skip. Sections about proposals from the National Science Board members, for example, which you won't have to worry about since most of you are not likely to be National Science Board members. So don't be intimidated by this document. Also, make sure you are reading the most recent version, the version that applies. Revisions to this guide are put out in advance, and they state in them when they will apply. So if one's just come out and you are submitting to a competition currently, it probably does not apply because it will be taking effect in some weeks, possibly even some months. But read it, skim it at least, go through it, and make sure you look at all the sections that seem relevant to your particular proposal and program. Next slide, please. Okay, why do we send something back? Well, you've got to have all the sections we expect. You have to include the separate intellectual merit and broader impacts. NSF is a government agency. We want you to fit into society. We want you to have demonstrations as to why your research should be supported by society. So we expect intellectual merit, that's your science. You're almost certainly going to get that right. And we expect broader impacts. There's a lot of discussion about that. There's a lot of material, FAQs, and other descriptions of what it means. And again, ask us. Ask early, ask often. If you're not sure what counts, if you're not sure what counts as good broader impact, what counts as routine, ask. Don't forget, you have to include results from any prior support you've received from NSF. You need to have a data management plan. Even if you think you don't need a data management plan, you need to include a plan that says, I don't need a data management plan. That'll be judged as part of the review process. And if they think you did need a data management plan, well, that'll be a negative. If you are requesting research for a postdoc, include a postdoc mentoring plan. We're keen to generate the next generation of researchers. That includes helping junior researchers to do a better job. Next. There are very few things that the National Science Foundation will not fund, but there are some. So if it turns out that you're asking us to fund something we don't fund, then your proposal may be returned. And that'll be explained to you. Ask the program officer. We have occasionally received proposals that want funding to start immediately, and we can't do that because the review process takes time. We have other mechanisms for that. Ask us, ask early, ask often. We have some competitions that include preliminary proposals and a mandatory invite or do not invite. If you don't get invited and you submit anyway, you'll get it sent back. We also don't like to review the same thing multiple times. If you've been reviewed and your proposal was declined for funding, we expect you to fix whatever the review process identified as the deficiencies before you submit it again. And we also don't expect you to submit the same research to different programs at the NSF. Increasingly, as multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary research becomes more important and more widespread, there is more than one program to which you could apply for your support for your idea. But we don't like to review multiple proposals that are identical. If you think it fits multiple programs, we can review it in multiple programs. We can review a single proposal across multiple programs, but ask us about it. Ask early, ask often. Next slide. We have the specific requirements, formatting, page limits. One of the harder ones is whether it doesn't actually respond to the solicitation. If you send in a proposal to a program that's requesting, that's funding people to work on forestry, and you're asking for support to look at the stars, we'll probably try and send it to a different program. But if we can't find one, we'll send it back as not responsive. If you miss the deadline, we won't review it. Substantial revision, that was one we mentioned before. We do occasionally see people submitting things that we've already funded. That's fairly rare, but it does happen. All right, now that basically is what happens if you don't get to the next step in the review. And Thiaga is now going to discuss what happens to the review process when we've accepted the proposal. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll hand over to him.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Thanks for a great introduction. And for everyone, I am Thiaga Nandagopal. I am a Deputy Division Director at the National Science Foundation, and I've been at NSF for roughly 9 years now. So here I am today to talk about what happens after you submit a proposal to NSF, right? So you've gone through the initial vetting, everything seems in order. So our job is now to assess the proposal's value and see if NSF should be funding this. And to that effect, what we rely on are certain guiding principles that underlie the merit review process that NSF conducts on every proposal that's submitted. The first principle is that every project should be of the highest quality and should have the potential to advance to frontiers of knowledge and maybe even transform the frontiers of knowledge, right? So again, it has to move the science forward, move knowledge forward. And projects in aggregate should not just focus on just simply advancing technical know-how, but also contribute broadly to achieving societal goals. So in some sense, what this means is we don't want science to happen in a vacuum. It has to be happening with an awareness of how this science could contribute to helping society at a very broad scale, right? Again, there's no specific metrics, but in some sense, we are looking at how it can broadly help achieve societal goals. Now, in addition to these two, the third principle that we want everyone to be aware of is the fact that meaningful assessment and evaluation of these projects, of the activities that you undertake as part of the project, should be provided and should be based on the appropriate metrics, including the resources that you will need to conduct such assessments. So this is something that we look for in proposals as well. So these are three guiding principles. Can you go to the next slide? And using these principles, the National Science Board, which oversees NSF, has come up with merit review criteria, which are used by reviewers to assess the quality and the benefits of a particular project. And these two criteria are intellectual merit and broader impacts. The intellectual merit, as the name implies, looks at the potential to advance knowledge, right? The technical piece of it, the scientific part of it. The broader impacts criteria looks at the potential of the project's activities to benefit society at large and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. Now, there's a lot to unparse with what broader impacts means. Many folks can understand what intellectual merit means. It is fairly straightforward. You're a scientist, you work in a specific area, you know what it means to advance knowledge. The broader impacts, well, societal benefits, what does it mean? Where do I find it? How do I identify that? That may be a little bit new to some folks, and we are here to talk about that. Next slide. So within these criteria, what specifically reviewers are asked to address as they review a proposal are the 5 review elements listed on this slide. Okay, so the first one, looking at it from the intellectual merit point of view, what is the potential of the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within the own field or across different fields? Sometimes the science you develop as part of a particular proposal could advance knowledge in other fields as well. So that is also valuable. So we want to look at it from that perspective for the intellectual merit. In terms of broader impacts, we are looking at the potential of the proposed activities in the project to benefit society, as I discussed before, or advanced desired societal outcomes. Now, I just want to take a little bit of time here to kind of explain. So broader impacts can mean many things. It is not a laundry list. Broader impacts could mean education, it could mean outreach, it could mean just the fact that your science is going to have a significant impact, like the industry translation of the outcomes into products that can change how we live and think and work. So all of these are possible. It could be, bringing in a high school student for a summer camp. It could be any of those activities. It could be mentoring someone. However, what we are looking for in proposals is a set of specific activities that you propose to undertake as a proposer, as a PI, that will contribute to those activities. It's not as simple as saying this work will do X automatically. You have to identify how your work will benefit that. What are you going to do to make that happen, the translation happen, for example. So that is something to keep in mind. So the evaluation is based on the activities, right? Not on the end state, but on the activities. So with that, the second criteria is to what extent do these proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. Now, once again, in the intellectual merit context, this is very clear, right? We are looking for creativity and originality, and maybe even something that can transform the field. When it comes to broader impacts, it doesn't always have to be creative or original. What we are looking for is, in some sense, something that is very well addressed and tailored to the particular scope of the space that you are in. For example, if you're going to teach to an undergraduate class, you are teaching this advanced concepts to an undergraduate classroom, there's only a few ways in which you can teach them. And what we are trying to look for is, are you tailoring it to your particular context? So that's what we are looking for. So that doesn't necessarily mean creative in the sense of coming up with a completely novel curriculum or anything. It's just how are you tailoring what you have to the context that you are cited in, right? So that's something to look at. The third criteria is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities that you lay out in your proposal. Is it well reasoned, well organized, and is based on a sound rationale? And more importantly, does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? So if you are going to do a certain set of activities, how can one know that these activities have succeeded? What defines success in your mind? So we would like to see that laid out in the proposal, right? And that's something the reviewers will comment on. And also, the reviewers will comment on how well qualified is the individual or the team, depending on the nature of the proposal, as well as the institution to conduct the proposed activities. In some cases, the institutional resources may be at play that may be required by the team of PIs to conduct the activities. That information should be present in the proposal. So we want to look at the qualifications of the team and the institution as well. And the last criteria element is, are there adequate resources available to the PI, right? Either directly at their home institution or through their collaborations and partnerships to carry out the activities that they propose in the proposal. So it's entirely based on what you describe in the proposal. We do not rely on the track record of the PI. We are not going to say, well, this institution is amazing, they'll take care of it. No, we actually want to see what your activities listed in the proposal are and comment based on that. So reviewers are asked to focus purely on what is written in the proposal and not take any additional extraneous content that is otherwise not described in the proposal. This is how we keep the review process fair, right? That's how someone from a top school can compete on the equal footing with someone who's not from one of the top 50 schools, for example. So that level of fairness is key and a primary factor within NSF's merit review process. Next slide. And our reviewers are asked to make sure they'll address these 5 review elements in a fair and unbiased fashion. So if you are a reviewer and you try to enter, go into Fastlane, which is a system that we use to submit our reviews, you will see the following box. This is how it looks. So in case you are wondering, there are 3 boxes, text boxes in there. The review elements are listed there. The criteria are provided there for intellectual merit and broader impacts. There's 2 boxes for each, one for each. So reviewers are asked to comment on each of these 5 elements in each of these criteria. And on top of this, there are also specific additional criteria that may come out in funding opportunities that are, so for example, called solicitations. So this is different from just submitting to NSF as part of a regular, the PA PPG that Nigel mentioned before. There are additional funding opportunities that call out specific additional criteria which we would like to see in a proposal. And these may have to do with intellectual merit or with broader impacts or with teaming and so on. And the reviewers are asked to take a look at the solicitation specific review criteria listed in the solicitation. They are given the guidance and they will enter that strengths and weaknesses of the proposal against that particular criteria in the box that you see here. So all in all, essentially we try to go make it very clear as to what is expected, so the reviewers are not surprised, and we provide them the opportunity to comment on each of those, the strengths and weaknesses for each of these 5 elements. Next slide. Now, how do we go about the review process? Often when the proposals come in, we could use one of 2 ways of doing reviews. One is we send out reviews to individual reviewers who are experts in the field, and we kind of ask them, here's a proposal submitted by so-and-so, would you be able to review this for us? And once they concur, we give them this proposal, and they take a certain amount of time, and they provide us the review using the forms that you saw earlier in the previous slide. And these are called ad hoc reviewers. These are we just contact different individuals and we get them back. And assessments are made based on the different individual reviews that are received. The other type of reviews that we conduct are panels, review panels. These are face-to-face sessions, or in these days, as you know, virtual sessions, conducted by people getting together and come to NSF or any other location, right, or virtual, and meet and talk about the proposals. So they, in some sense, behave like ad hoc reviewers, but there's an additional step. So they get the proposals ahead of time. They review the proposals like an ad hoc reviewer would, but they also get together and they meet to discuss the broad set of proposals that that the program has. And typically, these reviewers are recruited for their broader scientific knowledge, because in addition to the proposals that they are reviewing specifically in detail, they also are asked to comment on other proposals that are being discussed, which they may not have reviewed. And these discussions can bring to light additional contextual points that may benefit the review process as a whole. So some proposals may typically undergo panel review, and some may be just purely done by ad hoc reviews. Different programs have different practices. And in addition, certain proposals, depending on whether they are interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, however you want to name it, they may be reviewed by multiple panels, because each panel has a certain set of domain expertise, and cross-cutting themes may be best reviewed by different panels with different domain knowledge. And the program officers would essentially take that cumulative input from the panels and use that to make a decision. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, in some cases, we may end up doing ad hoc reviews to get additional inputs from experts and ask our panelists to comment on the cumulative set of reviews that have been received. And in certain types of proposals can also be reviewed without external inputs. They can be reviewed internally by NSF program officers alone. And some other examples are proposals submitted to rapid response research grants called RAPIDS. Again, this is described in the PA-PPG. Also the EAGRs, the early concept grants for exploratory research, as well as the research advanced by interdisciplinary science and engineering proposals. So these are RACE proposals, as well as proposals for conferences that come with a budget under $50,000. So these are examples of proposals. There are others that can be internally reviewed without having to seek external review input. Next slide. So since NSF values the review process a lot in terms of providing feedback to program officers on how and what to consider before deciding to fund a proposal, we place utmost care in the reviewer selection process. And we take a lot of effort to ensure that reviewers with the appropriate content expertise, as well as a broad perspective of the scientific area or the educational areas as appropriate, are recruited. Right? We also ensure that the reviewers are diverse in not just the institution type that they come from, also from the geographical point of view or from the gender or demographics point of view. We try to have a diverse set of reviewers in our panels, primarily with the idea that a diverse group can provide diverse perspectives. And these diverse perspectives are often helpful to ensure that good research gets funded. Also, ideas that may be innovative and potentially risky get the right treatment, because NSF likes to take risks and bet on scientific ideas that have the potential to transform, however risky they might seem. So we emphasize that point to our reviewers, and our reviewers, we draw from a diverse array of sources. The program officers, many of whom have been in the field for a very long time. This includes the core of program officers who are permanent at NSF, also rotators who come in from outside, who have a more up-to-date knowledge of the new people in the field, the junior researchers as well. So we use that knowledge to recruit reviewers, including international reviewers. We look for references in the proposal. So this is important as well for you to keep in mind when you list the references in your proposal descriptions. We also look for professional societies and recruit people from there. We look for, of course, web searchers to look at the scientific journal articles in that space and conference papers in that space, and also rely on former reviewers, as well as an important point here that many do not know is that when you submit a proposal to NSF, there is an option to suggest reviewers for the proposal. Clearly, we want you to submit people who do not have a conflict with the proposal, who are in a position to evaluate the proposal. And if you can submit those reviewer recommendations, we would include that as part of our reviewer pool that we draw from. It's not always guaranteed that we will accept those reviewer recommendations, but they definitely add to the reviewer pool that we rely on for reviewing proposals in this area. So I'll encourage everyone to consider sending in suggested reviewer recommendations when you submit a proposal. You could also contact a program officer and offer suggestions on who are the best folks that you think might be in a position to review a certain area. This might be very helpful when you are working on cross-cutting programs. Next slide. Okay, again, one of the best ways to kind of understand how the NSF process works is to kind of see the review process happen from the background, right? And the way to do this is to become a reviewer yourself. And how do you become a reviewer? You should feel free to contact the NSF program officers who are handling the program. And these folks are listed on the NSF directories, websites, or in the program descriptions or the solicitation descriptions that come out with a funding opportunity. And the best thing that you can do in some sense is when you reach out to us by email or when you meet us in person, once we get past this pandemic, the best way is to start off by introducing yourself and giving you a brief overview of your research experience and offering to serve as a reviewer, right? And send us CV, a curriculum vitae. Please definitely send this, because without that, it's much harder for us to kind of parse the specific domain knowledge that you have and assess the fit for our programs. And tell them that you are willing to serve and what is the general availability like, right? Now, remember that we do have a big pool of reviewers. We often tap maybe less than 10% of your community at any given time for a particular proposal, and we kind of go through the database eventually. So do not get antsy if you do not hear back from a program manager right away. But we do acknowledge the fact that we have received your email. But if you don't hear back from someone saying, oh, I haven't heard back offering for any particular panel opportunities, what's going on? You don't like me? That is not the case. It's just the case that we have a large pool of potential reviewers, and we would like to kind of go through the list and assess fit and other aspects before we can identify the right reviewers for a particular program. But again, the key is to ensure that you reach out to us and tell us that you're available to serve, because that's the best way to make sure that you can become a reviewer for this program. Next slide. And the reviewer, again, because this is the critical piece of the merit review process, the reviewers are always instructed to consider the merit review criteria and any program-specific criteria that I described earlier that is described in the program funding opportunities. We want them to look at the appropriateness of the plan, the budget, the resources, and the timeline. Of course, weigh it against the priorities of the scientific field at that time and the potential risks and benefits of the project, right? Now, every reviewer is asked to comment on each proposal independently, right? When I say independently is if they have given like 5 or 6 proposals, We don't want them to compare or rank order proposals against each other. We're saying this proposal is better than the other one. We want them to provide us advice on each proposal in its individual, on its own merit, right? Again, pros and cons. We do not want them to start comparing proposals, and you will never see a proposal reviews that says this proposal is better than the 3 other proposals that I saw. You will not see that because we instruct them precisely to be independent in their assessments. And similarly, we also ask panel reviewers when they come in and meet for an in-person panel to talk independently, weigh in with their own opinions and not be biased or by what somebody else thinks, right? So we want every panelist to provide their feedback independently and unbiased in unbiased fashion. So that is in some sense the instructions that we provide to ensure an unbiased and thorough scientific review process. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, the review panel, once they meet and discuss the merits of the proposal, and again, this may be not just the folks who have read the proposal, but others who are in there with the broad scientific knowledge who can chime in with questions and clarifications on the merits and questions around the proposal. The panel will write a summary of the discussion that captures additional points that were discussed at the panel. So this would be in addition to what the reviews themselves individually provide. The panel summary would act as a roll-up of all the discussion points that happen. And in this is the place where there may be a ranking in some sense of some sort. So there are different categories in which proposals are placed, and that the categories where the proposal is placed by the panel hints at the relative merits of the different proposals. So some categories could be highly recommended, recommended, and not recommended, right? And you may, by virtue of seeing where your proposal was, you have a sense of where you placed relative to other proposals in the panel. And there are other categories used by NSF across different programs. But this is the one place where you will get some specific feedback in addition to the review scores about how the rest of the proposals fare in some sense. Next slide. So again, I would emphasize that the best way to learn more about NSF firsthand is to get behind the scenes and serve as a reviewer and a panelist for us, right? And that way you kind of learn by watching others what are the good ways to write a proposal and what are the not so good ways of writing a proposal. And you also get to meet with your colleagues and interact with NSF program officers and understand program priorities, for example, and the trends in the field in a way that you otherwise would not. You'll have to do it more work than if you did an NSF panel. You get a lot more information by just serving on one panel at least. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to NSF program officers to do this. And with that, I also want to emphasize why, as I mentioned before, we take great pride in ensuring an unbiased and thorough review process. And part of that is the unbiased part. And to talk more about that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Santoro, Office of General Counsel, to talk more about how do we identify and clear out bias in the process. On to you, Karen.
Thank you, Thiaga. Next slide, please. NSF's review process is called the gold standard because in addition to rigorous scientific review, NSF takes conflicts of interest very seriously. Why? We do that because we have to remove bias due to affiliations with institutions and individuals that could affect the review, and also to ensure fairness and be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Next slide, please. When you serve on an NSF review panel, you become a government employee. And as a government employee, you are subject to federal ethics laws and regulations, including conflicts of interest. Examples of institutional affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest law is your current employer. If you are a professor at University X, you cannot review a proposal submitted by University X. Other examples include anywhere else you hold a position. For example, if you're adjunct at another university or you're a consultant to an organization. When you're looking for a job, you cannot review any proposal involving your potential employer. If you serve on the board of directors or hold an office in a professional or scientific society, we won't have you review a proposal involving that organization or society. Next slide, please. The ethics rules also cover individual affiliations. For example, your spouse, a business partner, your PhD advisor, your PhD students, a co-author or co-PI within the past 4 years, and co-editors within the past 2 years. Now we're seeing situations where there are 20, 50, maybe even 100 co-authors on a paper. And if that's the case, and you really don't know many of those co-authors, and you didn't work directly with many of them, we ask you to tell the NSF Program Officer about that, because NSF may be able to grant a waiver in that situation. Likewise, for co-editors, we see associate editors of 12, 15, 20, and you may not even know them all. Let the NSF Program Officer know, and we will consider a waiver in that situation. Finally, let NSF know about any affiliation with an individual or an institution that appears in a proposal, even if it wasn't listed on these slides. This way, NSF can determine whether it rises to the level of a conflict, and if so, NSF can determine how best to manage it. On to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Karen. I think it's important to emphasize how critical the conflict of interest rules are. If you are serving as a reviewer and do not reveal a conflict, it is possible for the entire process to be voided later. We've had an entire review panel cancelled because of an unrevealed conflict of interest. So you talk about it. If there's any doubt, tell us. So let's move to the next slide. I'm back to discuss how we make these decisions, how things move forward from after the review, assuming we did everything correctly. So we run a merit review. Most of them go through panel, some go through individual review, often multiple reviews. What comes out of that is a recommendation where the review process says, yes, this is good, this should be funded, this is the right time for this project, these are the right people to do it. They also include feedback, what they consider strengths or weaknesses. You'll often see, oh, this point could have been better explained, or I would have liked to see something about whatever. The merit review process is not the only advice, it's not the only criterion that goes into making a funding recommendation. It is in most programs the single most important piece of advice, the single most important input, but it's not the only one. There are program goals, there are portfolio considerations such as distribution in both geographic terms, in demographic terms, in type of institution, and so on. Program officers do not actually fund anything. Program officers, we only make recommendations. Those recommendations then go to a second level of check carried out by division directors, and then they're passed on, next slide, and go through essentially legal and budgetary checks. What comes back from the review? Individual reviewers give ratings. We have a 5-point system: excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. We have seen proposals get everything from an E to a P. You get some discussion and analysis of how well the review process and the program officers considered you addressed the review criteria that we discussed earlier. Some discussion of the strengths and weaknesses. And you should get at least some indication of why a proposal is turned down, if it is. It's not always obvious. You get a certain amount of feedback, and it can be difficult to disentangle what might have been the most important concerns. So you ask the program officer. The material you get, the notification you get, tells you who to contact for questions. Next slide. You'll get copies of the of the written reviews, anonymized. We promise confidentiality to all reviewers, as mentioned. If a panel review was carried out, there should be a summary of the discussion. This will not be simply a restatement of individual reviews. It'll be some indication that the panel talked about certain things, certain things that were addressed in the reviews, or additional things. Most programs use something called a context statement, which discusses the overall context of the program, roughly how many proposals might have been received, how they were reviewed, panel, ad hoc, that sort of thing. And then you will get a certain level of program officer comment to the principal investigator, to the PI on the proposal. And there are various routes that we take for that. Formal, informal, email, phone calls occasionally. They're less popular these days. Many people are not reachable by phone. Next slide. So if it's not bad science, if it's got a good broader impacts program, and yet it was still declined, why is that? Well, the first thing to bear in mind is it's a genuine competition. You are not being evaluated on the intrinsic merit of the research proposed. You're being competed against other proposals. Success rates are not terribly high at the moment. So you might simply have just not competed. Somebody else outcompeted you. If that happens, then there's a chance you'll be encouraged to try again. If there were flaws, if there were issues that the program officer thinks you could do better next time, please pay attention to them. It's not a random process. If you address those flaws in a resubmission, you will generally do better. I can't promise that you will do well enough to get into the funding the next time. And of course, the classic problem, we get a lot of competitive proposals, even highly competitive proposals, and we don't have enough money to fund them all. And I apologize if you were the one. I know it's no consolation to be the top-ranked unfunded proposal because it contains the word unfunded, but that is unfortunately the way things happen. Next slide. So, revise, resubmit. Talk to the program officer, ask often, ask early, ask the program officer, do you think this is likely to be a competitive proposal in this program if I address the weaknesses? Do you feel that there's a different program that I could submit to? Do you think I should change the emphasis? The program officers go through all the reviews, they listen carefully, they take their own notes, and they can help you. So, if you're encouraged to resubmit, please do. Persistence is a virtue. It's something I tell all the people I have to decline. So I'm going to have Thiaga talk about the next stage in the process.
Okay, once you have contacted your program officer and you feel like you have somehow feel like the NSF merit review process was not satisfactory, there is a process detailed in the PAPPG called reconsideration. And essentially this basically says that you are not happy with the way the process was conducted, and therefore you request an explanation and a potential reconsideration of a re-evaluation of your proposal. And the way this works is that you look at your reviews, and what you should do is to ask for an explanation from the program officer and potentially the division director of the division where the program is cited. So you kind of explain what your concerns are with respect to the process. So not necessarily from a technical point of view. So the reconsideration process is not designed to say, my science is good, but the other person said my science is bad. That's not what the process is supposed to do. It's more to address the questions of, is the review process done fairly? Do you sense any kind of unfairness or bias in the review process? Or anything that deviates from the norms described in the PA-PPG about what the review process should look like. So this is another good reason for you to read the PA-PPG and be familiar with how it explains the review process criteria are. Again, I mentioned the review criteria as well earlier in this presentation. So if you're not satisfied with the explanation provided by the program officer and the division director, you can submit a request requesting a formal reconsideration to the assistant director of the directorate within that program. There are 7 research directorates in the NSF, and there are 7 assistant directors for each one of them. For each of them has an assistant director. So within 90 days of the decision to decline, when you get the email feedback, you have to submit a written request for reconsideration. And the assistant director would essentially have someone look at it in an independent fashion, assess the review process, and if they deem it to be fair, then you will get a response saying that they considered it and they have declined it. Or they may say, well, we did evaluate it and we find some merit in your claim, therefore we will reconsider the proposal, in which case it will be transferred off to, the proposal itself will be transferred off to somebody else, independent program to reevaluate with a fresh set of eyes. So that will in some sense take another few months for the review process to play out, and it will play out just like any other review process would. Now, if the assistant director also says that they did not find merit in your request for reconsideration, you still have the option to request this from the deputy director of NSF. And again, you have to do this within 60 days of the response from the assistant director for the directorate. You can request the formal reconsideration to the deputy director. So it gives you multiple options to do so. And I just wanted to make sure that the time it takes for these things to play out, and again, I'm not recommending one way or the other. It's just that you may be better off in some ways to look at the next funding opportunity and try to address the proposal's weaknesses and see if you have a better shot there. But again, it doesn't preclude you from trying this one as well. This is just an option available for you to consider. Next slide. Now, when a program officer looks at a proposal that has been rated well by the reviews on the panel, they have to look at multiple considerations. It's not necessarily always about the review criteria itself. As Nigel said earlier, we have to look at the review criteria, obviously the ratings. We are looking at the potential impact of the proposal and the balance across the different fields. So we kind of say, well, have we funded a lot in this space? Have we funded something similar? We look at the potential for the proposal to enhance and broaden the participation of underrepresented groups in this particular field. And we look at the educational impact as well as the impact on the institution and the state. So these are criteria that are addressed in the broader impacts, and this is why we encourage everyone to pay attention to broader impacts. Do not just play lip service, because these matter when it comes to making funding decisions. There are certain programs that are treated differently, uniquely, right? So career is targeted towards aspiring faculty, early career faculty. There's RUI programs that are targeting undergraduate institutions, and EPSCOR programs which target a certain subset of states that have less funding overall compared to many other states. So research funding. So these programs have some special considerations and criteria for what may be considered for an award. In many cases, higher success rates than normal. So these would be factors as well. We look at other support that the PI currently has. So let's say we have 2 proposals, one both equally good in some sense, in all things being equal. But the only difference is one PI is extremely well funded at this point. They have probably another year or 2 of support, and this other PI has no support whatsoever. We may end up going in favor of a PI who requires support right now, in the hopes that the other person could be funded by other means later as well. So, and then again, there is always the concept of, are we taking a risk in a new area? Are we furthering the research in a certain area. This is kind of the new launch versus continuing the status quo, making steady progress along a certain line. So we kind of look at this balance as well and the portfolio overall. So the program officer has to weigh all of these in context before making a decision. And therefore, if you have very good reviews that you think are very promising in your mind, and yet you get a proposal that's declined, it will help for you to reach out to the program officer to understand what is it that they could have done better, or what are the factors that went into why your proposal was not funded. And you may come to understand this decision process a little better. Next slide. As Nigel mentioned, the panel advises, the reviewers advise, the program officer recommends, the division leadership will concur with the recommendation, and the NSF Division of Grants and Agreements reviews these recommendations, and they officially make the award, right? So they're the ones who can say the word, we are awarding the proposal. And we do look at, as part of this process, whether the institution has adequate grants management capacity. We don't have any overdue final reports. Therefore, it's very important to make sure that when you submit a proposal looking for funding from NSF, please do not have any overdue reports. Turn your reports in on time. And there are no other outstanding issues with the institution or the PI that maybe someone may be aware of. So these are the things that the due diligence that the grants officers make in NSF prior to making an award. So that's how the entire merit review process plays out from start to end. So for more information, next slide, you can definitely go to the NSF homepage. There is material about the funding process, as well as you can look up for awards and research areas and do all the research about the particular programs that you're interested in at this place. Next slide. And as Nigel mentioned, I would emphasize this again. When you are in doubt, ask early and ask often.
Ask early, ask often.
Exactly, ask early, ask often. And the list, if you're not sure who to reach out to, start with the NSF staff directory. A more better place would be the division research pages that you see on the NSF website, or the program funding opportunities that list different program officers involved. Now, as I mentioned before, you are welcome. You should try to serve on an NSF review panel to gain more inside knowledge about how the whole process works and benefit from that. An even more interesting opportunity is for you to try to come and serve as a rotator at NSF. That way you get your hand in not just looking at how things work, but also shaping new programs and funding opportunities for your research area. So there's some very exciting opportunities abound, and we're always looking for talented, motivated, qualified people to come and serve here. So if you're inspired by the work that NSF does, please consider coming and working with us as a rotator for a stint of anywhere between 2 to 4 years. So with that, I think we come to the end of this presentation, and we are now happy to take questions from you.
Thank you all very much. And we've been receiving lots of your questions and answering lots of your questions in the Q&A as well. So I'd like to welcome back Nigel and Karen. Unfortunately, Thiaga, who presented, was not able to be with us today for the Q&A. What I will do, we've got about 20 minutes to answer questions. So we've received a lot, and we're going to go through as many as we can get through in those 20 minutes. What I would recommend, and I did put in the chat, was a link to the NSF Merit Review website, which has a lot of information about the process that we just heard about, and also links to the policy behind that process, to the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So we have a lot of questions. I'm just going to start for you both and start going through them. A lot of questions about reviewers, and being a reviewer, and that's how Thiaga kind of concluded there. So the first question is, what do you look for in the CV of a reviewer? What are the qualifications you look for if they have not already received an NSF award?
Oh, sorry.
Nigel?
You want me to answer? You want me to
Sure,
answer
that would be for you, yes.
Right. So always the first thing is understanding and knowledge of the scientific field of the proposal. Depending on the proposal, we actually review multiple aspects, and we will often use multiple reviewers to do it. So we'll have a practicing scientist look at the scientific program plan, the research. We'll ask someone with a good educational program to look at some of the broader impacts aspects. We'll consult with program managers and budget people. The sort of simple review, we start with the research area, because most researchers have at least some understanding of education, of public speaking and other outreach or broader impact activities and so on. But we will then look for other expertise, especially depending upon the proposal. There's no easy universal answer. We look at the proposal, we decide what judgment we need, and we ask for it. And let me just make the standard pitch. If we ask you to be a reviewer, please do your best to help us out.
Okay, a question is, do reviewers find out if proposals that they reviewed have been funded? Is the review process anonymized on both sides? And I believe we talked about this a little bit, but perhaps you can expand on that.
Yeah, we're not, I'd actually answer a question in the Q&A. We're not currently doing blind review. We're trying to work out ways that we could that meet the requirements, but it's a very difficult issue with the current merit review process, and we've been trying to work out how to do it within that, or whether we need to request changes to the merit review criteria, which of course would have to go all the way up through management to the National Science Board. So at this time, it's not a blind review to the reviewers. The proposers do not know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers do know who the proposers are. In some cases, one of the problems is after the review is over, we're all busy scrambling on something else. I myself and many of my colleagues, we do try to let the reviewers know what the outcome was in the end, who got funded, whether they got funded at their request. Reviewers will sometimes say part of a project is good, fund only that bit, and so on. We do try to let them know, but we do fall down on that. If you are a reviewer, if you have reviewed for us and you're curious, don't forget it takes a while, as I think I said, but feel free to ask the program officer. He or she may not be able to tell you, we may not be able to answer, but there's no reason you can't ask. And I do try to let them know. As to the blind review question, we're working on it. It's a slow process.
Okay, for proposals that are resubmitted, are reviewers or program officers looking for substantial changes between the two proposals? And should PIs dedicate a section in the project description to address those changes? And then I should also add, because I saw another question about this on whether we have standing review panels or not.
Right. I invoke the mantra, ask early, ask often. It varies quite a bit across programs because of the definition of substantial change. I think it's really something where you have to ask the program officer, ask their opinion. Program officers are present throughout the review process. We're there when the debate goes on. We listen to the things they say that they don't write down, and so on. And so they have the person who ran the review process has a much better feel for whether it's reasonable to resubmit essentially unchanged, update the references, but or not. NSF's conflict of interest rules make it almost impossible to have standing review panels. We will occasionally have a reviewer who can serve on a panel 2 years in a row, even 3 years in a row before they burn out. But we don't have standing panels. And so a new review panel generally has no knowledge of previous proposals. We therefore, this is a personal opinion, I do not believe it's a good idea to put in a section saying what you've changed, because that alerts the new reviewers that you've already been turned down once and may prejudice them. Generally speaking, I recommend that you write the proposal taking into account the concerns, expand the sections they found confusing, address the issues they found, but don't write anything explicitly in the proposal about how you've modified it.
Okay, and another question on reviewers. Can you be a reviewer during the same proposal cycle your organization is submitting a proposal?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
It depends. Let's say you're part of your organization's proposal. You're the PI, for example. In that situation, NSF is generally not going to ask you to review, because that creates a situation where you're looking at the proposals of your direct competitors, and that introduces the potential for bias. If you are not involved in your organization's proposal, NSF may ask you to review. However, you're generally going to be excluded from serving on the panel where your organization's proposal is assigned. You may be able to serve on a different panel.
Okay, we say, Nigel, and you've invoked the ask early, ask often quite a bit. The question here is about providing a summary of a project, a one-page summary to a program officer prior to submitting a full proposal. Is this something you would recommend?
That's a very good point. That comes in with some of the other questions I saw about, how finding a program to submit to, or where do I send my idea, or do I send it to multiple places? When those questions come up, one of the things we recommend is send us a one-page summary, send it to a bunch of program officers and say, look, here's my idea. Do you think I can submit to your program, or do you know where there's a program at NSF I can submit to? I think I said it. It actually is part of our job to help you to ask us for money. And so it's all right to ask us how to ask us. So, submitting a one-pager, if you're working on an established area of the field and you have a good idea and so on, you probably don't need to do that, because there are core programs that fund these things. But particularly if you have a cross-cutting idea or an unusual idea, it can be a very good idea to send us a 1 or 2 pager. I always recommend you send an email to a few program officers and just ask. Some of us will answer you, some of us won't. Just be persistent. But yeah, in general, for core programs, no. The other part of that answer I forgot was, if you're looking for where to send a proposal, the awards search system at the NSF website is very helpful. You can look on keywords. So you pick some keywords for your research, for your proposal, and enter them in the awards search and look and see which programs have funded projects that look or contain those keywords. You will sometimes get far too many answers, but that's up to you to refine the keywords.
Okay, so a question here. When reviewers are presenting contradictory concerns, can they take the summary review as guidance regarding the most essential issues of concern and essentially dismiss any contradictory comments?
Well, that's the ask early, ask often again. Ask the program officer. The program officer is present during the discussion. They can tell you. I routinely send out an email that says, I'm very sorry, we're not able to support your proposal. It seemed to me that the most telling objection was, and I try to steer them through the reviews. And sometimes the telling objection is indeed in one of the individual reviews. Sometimes it's in the summary. You have to ask. There's no universal answer.
So we have, when we did the poll, I saw we have about 45% of our attendees were research administrators. Have you ever seen opportunities where a research administrator would be asked to serve on a panel?
Oh yes, it depends on the program. Our core programs generally, funding a university professor to have a research activity and pay for it. Generally speaking, they don't get that sort of review. But we do have now in the mid-scale programs, the $6 to $100 million, and in the very large programs and in facilities and so on, we often do administrative review, we do program management review, financial review, audit review. We do a number of things. And that does offer opportunities for research administrators to serve as reviewers. And it can be very helpful for them to see how it all works. It's also very helpful for us to get the perspective of people who are enabling the projects that we are funding. But it comes back to the same old thing. If you have an expertise in a given area or you have a particular interest, talk to the program officers who handle that intellectual area and see what sort of reviews they've got coming up. I've got one next week where I could have used where I am using research administrators, but obviously we use fewer of them than we use faculty and postdocs and so on, because of most of the programs don't need it.
Okay, and for programs that tend to use a number of ad hoc reviewers, do they still incorporate panel reviews? And if they do, how do you weigh the ad hoc reviews against the panel reviewers?
Again, you have to ask the program officer. We use ad hoc where, for example, we can't find people to serve on a panel with specific expertise. We'll get an ad hoc review to fill in a possible gap. The panelists are expected, and the program officer usually asks that the panel look at all the ad hoc reviews that have come in beforehand. Sometimes we'll have an ad hoc review after a panel because the panel will say, look, we can't judge this, get an extra review on it before you make a decision. All the reviews are factored in by the program officer making a recommendation. Yeah, and sometimes I will look at these things and I'll say, the panel really didn't consider this point from this review, because I was there listening to them and I felt, and I made a mistake by not asking them to consider it. I apologize for this. People may not realize this, but NSF program officers are human and we have been known to make mistakes.
Okay, not very often though. If you are selected as a reviewer and it's your first time doing this, can they expect any training of any type to make sure that they're fulfilling the role properly and meeting NSF expectations?
Yeah, we're not tremendously good at that. We have an awful lot of paperwork advice. We have a lot of guidelines, a lot of how to do this, that, and the other. And in fact, we do a number of these things in the grants conferences. We've had review panel acting out. We've had miniature plays of review panels and so on, discussing good and bad review. And so we have done that sort of thing. The most important thing is if someone asks you to be a reviewer and you'd like to try it out, but you're not sure and you want advice, ask the person who asked you, say to them, can you help me with this? If they give you pointers to the paperwork and you read the paperwork and it's not clear or you're confused, ask them again, ask them repeatedly. Being a reviewer is doing us a favor, and so we will often bend over to help you to help us. So there is training. There's a lot of advice, but not as much training as perhaps would be good.
There are at least 2 videos that reviewers can look at. One goes over unconscious bias, and the other one handles conflicts of interest.
Good point, Karen. Yes, I've forgotten those videos were generally available.
Can you talk about the components of a proposal that reviewers don't see? I guess if it's a part of a single copy document, if you're submitting anything in the single copy document, like collaborators and other affiliations,
right.
Reviewers to include or not include, those are not seen by reviewers.
Yeah. I mean, everything else is seen. I mean, this is another reason why the blind review process almost certainly will require significant changes to how we do it.
Okay. We talked towards the end about considerations for making an award, and we talked about launching versus maintaining. Is there one that's more favorable in the eyes of NSF over the other?
There is no NSF. NSF is a building full of iconoclastic individuals, actually all now working from home. No, there's this is part of the portfolio balance comment we made. You know, the portfolio balance in any given activity. In some of the areas that I handle, you know, review will say we don't need more observation. I'm an astronomer. We don't need more observations. We need more theory. In another area, will say we need more theory and no more observations. In some areas, they'll say, you know, we really need new ideas. Let's fund the off the wall stuff. And in some areas, they'll say, no, we need to consolidate by funding the. So it's very program and area dependent. You need to ask the specific.
Let's move on to a question about intellectual merit and broader impacts. And the question is, should the intellectual merit and broader impact components share the same theme? Is it necessary that they support one another?
We do generally prefer that the broader impacts relate to the actual intellectual merit of the project, that the work that you're doing in research helps to inform the broader impact activities, whatever they are. People doing simulations make attractive videos for planetaria in my field, for example. It's not required. Reviewers will occasionally comment about it, but it's not required. It's just, generally speaking, there's a preference if they're connected or in some way. That the research is making you a better communicator or a better public speaker or something.
Okay, and time for one or two more questions. When would someone list reviewers not to review a proposal?
Oh, you can do that anytime. We don't ask. One of the more amusing aspects of the job is reading why, you know, when people occasionally fill that out, some people actually tell us why. My favorite was always the one where the person said, use this person as a reviewer because he is capable of understanding my work if he concentrates. You know, it's like, but you don't actually have to give a reason. You can list someone to use or not to use for any reason whatsoever. We can't use your collaborators because of the conflicts discussion that we had earlier, but otherwise, we don't ask why you don't want someone used.
Okay, I want to thank you, Nigel and Karen, for participating today, and Thiaga in absentia. There is one more session this afternoon, which will cover the programs in the Directorate for Engineering. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day and week.
Can I make one last
rest
comment?
Of the conference. Absolutely.
I'm just going to make one last comment, which is, I know we didn't answer all the questions. My email is on the presentation and on the NSF website. You are welcome to ask any questions by email. I don't guarantee to answer them. I don't guarantee not to ignore you, depending what happens to me, but you're welcome to ask and try and see if you get an answer from me. I'll do my best, but no promises. But
thank you, Nigel. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.